Remain muted unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening, directors and members of staff. For the sake of the record, if you'd like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceeding, I'd ask you to wait for me to call you before proceeding to speak. Directors participating by phone can raise your virtual hand to indicate that you would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute settings on the phone, press *6. I'll call the roll now. Director Bouquet.
Present.
Director Broom.
Present.
Director Busick.
Here.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director DeShell. Excused. I am Director Geisinger. I am here. Director Guzman.
Present.
Director Harwick.
Here.
Director Rosenthal.
Present.
Director Rusha. Not yet. Director Sloan.
Here.
Director Tisdale.
Present.
Director Whitmore.
Present.
And Director Williams. Okay, so we have, let's see, 12 present and 3 absent at this point. Is that right? Yeah. All right, we have a quorum. Before we begin this evening, not that we would have to have a quorum, I guess, but we do. So before we begin this evening, I'd like to outline the purpose for tonight's discussion. It's a study session. We don't take any votes. It's intended to look at some of the issues around our governance and some things we've talked about in terms of our bylaws and operating guidelines and some things like that. No formal action is taken. It's really intended to inform the development of future recommended actions and discussion items. So it'll help us hone in on some of those things. We've set the schedule with times attached. We're going to try to stick to those. I'm not going to be unreasonable. If we have a good conversation going, we may go longer, but we're going to try to stay with the times that are written. So be concise, assume positive intent, and let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We act as a board. I appreciate Jack helping me with some of this. As we have a lot to cover tonight, I'm going to try to keep things moving. So we have a PowerPoint. It really is just background. We're not going to spend time on the PowerPoint, but it has language for the bylaws and some of those things. So any questions before we jump in? All right, great. Our first topic for discussion this evening is around the board bylaws and committee structure. We have several topics, and Secretary Sloan, I have asked to kick off the first conversation because she is, as someone said, the one who has tilted at windmills on this topic for some time. It is on informal meetings for 3 or more directors. Director Sloan, if you would take that over, please.
I would be happy. I would be happy to. And to me, it's more like Groundhog Day for all of us to be looking at this. But I believe this proposal for informal meetings of 3 or more directors would really be helpful to the board. And we're in a study session and our topic is studying ourselves. And I think this is an important thing to look at. The informal meetings proposal is transparent for the public because it gives notice to the public and an opportunity to attend. It's informal, so we will not, unless someone wants to set up themselves, all the accoutrements of our meetings in the boardroom, but the public would have notice of the topic and the time, and there would be a record, not YouTube record of the meeting necessarily, although potentially it could be. And that's great for the public, but I think it's also great for the board because we can learn what topics are interesting to, a subgroup of the board, and you at least get a heads up that that's going to come up, or maybe it's something you're interested in contributing to. So a board member would have notice, just like the public would. and have an opportunity to shape any proposal that would come out of the informal meetings. It's efficient because right now, only 2 people can discuss public business, but our bylaws require 3 people to propose an agenda item. And under those circumstances, you end up with a game of telephone, or I guess now it could be a game of email or texting, which might be fun for a while, but things lose coherence if, you know, there's not an accurate check of every communication, and you don't get the communication that you would have, you know, person to person at a meeting. And finally, it's in compliance, the proposal is in compliance with both the letter and the spirit of the Open Meetings Act. The daisy chains of communication that are now really the only way 3 people can propose an agenda item have been questioned in courtrooms. There's no true applicable decision now, but certainly there has been a lot of objecting to them. So I would propose that we would allow these informal meetings. It would require an amendment of our bylaws, and I continue to be firmly of the belief that this would aid the operation of the board.
Thank you very much. I think you can see the language that is proposed for the bylaw change. Would it be helpful to anyone to read that? Want to read that real quickly, Director Sloan?
I will. Informal meetings may be called to engage in discussions of public business by 3 or more directors. The purposes of such meetings may include discussion of a matter to bring to the board, relationships with stakeholders and constituents who would, this is not within the language, who would perhaps participate in the meeting, or other matters related to agency business. No formal action may be taken. The directors calling the meeting may set the location and agenda as appropriate to the topic of the meeting. Written minutes shall be recorded. And there's a subsection also to be added. The scheduling directors must provide the meeting agenda, including any materials, time, and location of the meeting to the executive manager, the board office, and the board chair at least 48 hours prior to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Let's see. It's not showing up down here, I guess. Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. I guess maybe I need a legal opinion on this, but I was under the impression that there was a state sunshine law and it specifically provided for 2, and that, you know, and that was really your only choice. How do we get around that? And maybe there isn't a state sunshine law in Colorado, and I'm thinking back to Florida or Illinois.
Well, I'll jump in and then we can ask our legal counsel to do it. But this is written to comply with the open meetings law, which is the state sunshine law. So it's written to provide that notice is given as required by the open meetings law, that the agenda is provided, and all of the information is put out public. So it basically is a public meeting if anybody wants to attend. Ms. Snyder, do you want to address that?
Yeah, Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Melanie Snyder, General Counsel. You did cover that correctly. And Director Broom, you're correct. Once it's more than 2 directors, then the open meetings law applies. So the way that this proposal is framed is if it's 3 directors or more, there would have to be notice consistent with the open meetings law. Notice of the meeting 24 hours in advance, and an identification of the topics to be discussed, as well as the opportunity for the public to be present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bouquet.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Secretary Sloan, for bringing this up. I know I've voiced some concerns in the past, so I just wanted, I just had a couple questions. And my first one is, are there any comparable publicly elected boards that do this process already?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer
Okay.
to it. I know there are several city councils that have subcommittees, perhaps with more than 2, so they must have some provisions in their city charter or their bylaws.
Okay.
I have not researched that.
Yeah, I think that might not be the worst thing to look into, just to see, if there's other boards you can mimic ultimately if it's going well or successful. So then just a couple questions. So keeping minutes, I'm assuming it'd be one of the 3 directors would keep minutes then, based on this proposal, because it looks like staff wouldn't need to be present, correct?
I think, again, that's why it's informal, and it would be easy to just appoint one of the organizers to prepare minutes, which, the minutes of the board are not really that detailed, but this also would comply with the law that minutes are taken.
Would this just apply for in-person meetings, or would Zoom meetings be a factor? Or has it been considered?
All of this is subject to Council Snyder's opinion, but it seems to me Zoom meetings, would meet the definition of a meeting. So would a telephone conference call.
Okay. And then I guess my ultimate concerns would be, again, just regarding accessibility to the public. I think I appreciate the spirit behind it. Ultimately, I just have a lot of concerns when it comes down to public accessibility, because it looks like in the language, the director's calling the menu may set the location and agenda. I know we went into just a conversation about like what location ultimately looks like, and how manageable and feasible it is. So I think that would just be something to consider. I would look into the research if other boards that are publicly elected that are doing this. Again, I have a lot of hesitancy. My full-time job is working at Douglas County School District, which, again, this isn't comparable, but going to it ultimately where they basically got a slap on the wrist, that school board, for doing daisy chain communication that ultimately led to the hiring and firing of their equivalent of their CEO, which is the superintendent. I guess that would be ultimately my concerns, and maybe just kind of looking into a little bit more research into, are there other boards that are comparable to this? Is it being successful? And then looking at the overall accessibility when it comes to the actual public actually having a say. So right now I'm just a little bit hesitant going forward with it. So if you were to ask me, obviously this isn't a vote, but I'm not 100% comfortable. But I appreciate the effort and I appreciate the spirit though. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Bouquet. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it would help to put this in context. The reason we're talking about a bylaw change to effectuate what is being called informal director meetings is that the bylaws currently constrain us only to certain types of meetings that are held. And it specifically talks about the regular board meeting, the annual meeting, the committee meetings, and so on. If we were to have something else, we have to amend the bylaws to allow something else. And I think that there is merit to the consideration of something else, provided that what is being done, which is what is proposed, is to give everyone fair notice. Relative to the district court opinion concerning the Douglas County School District and their daisy chain meetings, I take issue with the court's conclusion in that. I think what they did was perfectly proper. And this would be a way to say, even though that may be proper and you can do it, we want to be more open. We want to be more transparent. So, for example, 3 directors say, I'd like to talk about this particular issue and bring it up. How do they do it? They either daisy chain, which I think is perfectly legal, but a Douglas County District Judge disagrees with that conclusion, or we have to do something like this. I think it's worth exploring. I think it's worth bringing forward. And I think that any interest of the public is more than adequately protected by virtue of the mechanics that are being described in the proposed bylaw that we are studying, not acting upon, studying tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale and Director Guzman.
I'm just curious, in the language that's presented here, it refers to Article 4, Section 4, saying that the proposed bylaw amendments would need to add a new article. And if that is just an error, meaning that's supposed to say Article 4, Section 6, because it would be misplaced, I believe, under the current bylaws, if we put it in 4.
Mr. Kroll.
If I may, Director Guzman, I took this directly from the previous board report on this, and I think that previous board report contained a red line draft of the proposed changes, which had it inserted as a Section 4.
Okay.
Why that section was chosen, I don't know, but we could certainly revisit that.
Just that Section 6 under our current bylaws, as they're publicly displayed, is public meetings and executive sessions, which has a Section A and a Section B and no Section C. But Section 4 refers to the annual board planning meeting. And so I'm just thinking
Need to
technically
fix
that's
that.
an issue.
Okay, yeah, well taken.
That's all.
Anything else? No? Okay, Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Sloan, for bringing this forward. I like the idea, and I concur with her assessment that this would create more efficiencies for the board. And I also think that in, maybe brainstorming some of these issues, that directors could also brainstorm some of the questions that could be posed and perhaps streamline the amount of time that would be required of staff to address some of these issues. So I just think that it could provide more efficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Whitmore.
This is probably a strange question for our legal counsel, but when we speak about daisy chaining, would this allow, or could we craft an amendment to this proposed amendment to where you could have correspondence via email between 3 board members as opposed to just 2? Just a thought, because that's one of those hindrances when you have 3 people trying to bring forth a item for an agenda. I don't know, just a thought.
Again, I'll opine on this real quick and then turn it over to our real attorney here.
The real attorney.
Yeah, kind of. I don't practice anymore, but I think the problem with that is, are you complying with the open meetings law? And if, Director Tisdale, I think, makes a good argument that that does comply, but I don't know that anything about that daisy chain, I don't know that we could make that more public, that make it would comply if a judge were to say no. Okay, Ms. Snyder, about a real opinion.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And the short answer is you're correct. I mean, meetings under the open meetings law are described as not just in-person meetings, but telephone conversations, text messages, Zoom meetings, and emails are also included within the definition. So whether it's an in-person meeting or an email chain, you're going to still have to follow the same notice requirements.
Thank you. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Sloan, for bringing this forward again. I appreciate it. I think I'd just like to point out, Dr. Bouquet, thank you for the concerns. I understand those definitely. I think the main thing that comes to mind for me is still what came to my mind last year, which is the formation of board-initiated recommended actions and requiring requiring 3 directors to bring those forward. And I think this is definitely falls in the category. I know we're going to revisit smaller committees tonight of we can test this, we can try this, and we can revisit this. And I would suspect and even hope that one of the ways this would be utilized would be when we bring forward a board-initiated recommended action. That's always been a question in my mind as a director, is how to make that happen. Sometimes those will emerge out of a committee discussion, but I think this allows for those types of discussions to happen outside the construct of a committee, which I agree with Director Geisinger's point, or I'm sorry, Director Callan's point, that may actually contribute to some efficiencies. I did want to just take a moment and ask General Counsel Snyder if you have any major risks that we haven't talked about so far that you foresee with this, or any concerns that you might want to weigh in on at this time.
Thank you, Director Davidson. I think from an open meetings perspective, we have covered our bases, presuming that we are actually going to comply with what we're proposing. So we want to make sure we do that. The proposal also does highlight that there would be compliance with ADA requirements and accessibility requirements. So those are all things that are operationally, you just need to make sure we actually adhere to what we say we're going to do. But as proposed, I think there's a way to comply with it within the law.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I would just say to directors and the board office, I mean, this is, I think this is worth trying. I think this would be helpful, especially for those recommended actions. If we have a challenge with it, look to the board office. If we're, struggling to come up with all of the accessibility and everything that would be required in working with this on us, let's talk about it. Let's bring it back. So I'm certainly in favor of this and put it in the category of prototype it, try it, and revisit if it doesn't work. Thanks.
Thank you. I will note that Director Rusha has joined us, and I'm told that there's a raised hand on Zoom. The Director Busick, I can't see the raised hands. Oh, there he is. Okay. Director Busick, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Director Sloan, thank you again for bringing this forward. Thank you for your tenacity. And once again, I agree that this is an appropriate item for us to consider. I think that one of the bigger things, at least from where I am, is it would allow directors in a kind of a similar area to target an audience. For example, Director Davidson, Director Whitmore, and I each share portions of the city of Thornton. And it would be really nice for the 3 of us to get together with Thornton to talk about issues they're having as it relates to RTD. And this would be the perfect mechanism for us to do that. So for that and for other reasons that have already been discussed, I would be in favor of supporting something like this. And Director Tisdale, you are absolutely right about daisy chain communications. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Busick. Director Sloan, Secretary Sloan.
Yes, thank you all. And I would just like to add that if Director Guzman is correct and the group got the wrong section number rather than the correct one, if we could have all been together instead of emailing each other, it might have been a much better product. So thank you.
Great. I don't see any other hands. To me, I would agree with what Director Davidson said, that let's give this a try. I think that, the caucuses in the legislature got in trouble this year for kind of a gray area, and they've agreed not to have the meetings that they were having before. It seems to me like creating a process whereby we know we are complying with the open meetings law and other laws just protects us. We don't have to worry about whether daisy chain is okay or not. Director Guzman.
Thank you. 2 thoughts that I'm having right now. One, I appreciate that you left in the opportunity to use the RTD spaces for these meetings. I'm not technically savvy. I didn't have the 2-year break from my work to learn how to do all of the crazy things on Zoom that are available. So I do rely on other people for that ability. So the IT expertise would be really helpful in some of those instances, I can imagine. But I do want to maybe ask the GM CEO to weigh in just a little bit about what that is, or do we have to ask permission somehow? Like, what's the process? If we need a conference room, for example, how would we do that? And I don't know what that process looks like because it's something I've never done. So any direction, anybody, I don't know.
Sounds like you're asking a question for our GM CEO. I think, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. And if I may proceed with response, Director Guzman, thank you very much for the question. I believe what would be most prudent if one was interested in utilizing RTD-owned facilities would be to coordinate through the board office, and they could provide that support. More so if we're looking for any technological support utilizing virtual platforms, that too would be coordinated through board office staff, recognizing that other staff within the organization that is under my auspices, we are here to support the board and the overarching elements of the regional transportation district. So we would make ourselves available contingent upon notification and staff resources and availability. Thank you very kindly for the opportunity to address.
Thank you. Anything else, Director Guzman? Okay. I think I can take just sort of a thumbs up sort of indication for moving this forward to the executive committee and further. Thumbs up, thumbs? Let's see.
Madam Chair,
Uh-huh.
sorry, that wasn't recognized. We will formally vote on this, though, as a board.
Fully
Okay.
vote on this, of course.
Perfect.
And it will take 10 votes. So thank you very much. I'm already off the time schedule, but these first two topics are sort of the meatiest because our bylaws changes. So I am okay with that. Our next topic is around a proposed bylaw change to limit the length of our meetings with the ability to extend that. And I've asked Vice Chair Catlin to please kick off this conversation.
Thanks, Madam Chair. At the July Executive Committee meeting, we discussed the merits of setting a limit or fixed end time on board meetings, and I would actually kind of amend that to say guidelines for
Yeah.
board meetings, just not hard, fast limits, but just some guidelines. So there really was a consensus that it was worth further exploration. And so our board office did some really good research on what other boards and governmental agencies do to limit lengths of board meetings. And we're proposing a bylaw change and it was proposed at the end of the September Executive Committee meeting. And we received feedback from a number of board members, and a revised proposed bylaw change was circulated to the full board. Now we're looking at it in this study session to really gain additional input and to discuss it. So the goal tonight is to get input on the proposed language for a bylaw change to limit or to provide guidelines limiting the length of board meetings. Unless there is significant objection, it is anticipated that a formal change would be brought forward in November. So just some of the history, and I really want to thank the board office for compiling these data. There were 3 meetings in 2023 that exceeded 4 hours. The Operations and Safety Committee meeting on March 8th, that was 4 hours and 24 minutes. The full board meeting on April 25th, that was 5 hours and 19 minutes. The full board meeting on June 27th, which was 5 hours and 49 minutes. There were 2 additional board meetings that exceeded 3.5 hours. The full board meeting on February 28th, that was nearly 4 hours long, just 5 minutes shy. And the full board meeting on March 28th, which was just a little over 3.5 hours. So the average length of a full board meeting is 3.5 hours, which is quite a bit of time. And I do remember in years past, there were some meetings that even exceeded the 5-hour mark. And there were a couple of them that went on till midnight, 11 o'clock or midnight. So I think everybody that I've talked to has agreed that after a certain time that has been expelled, you lose focus and you lose a little energy. And so that's my personal opinion. I'm going to go ahead and read the proposed bylaw change. Add the following language to Article 4, Prin Meetings, Section 8, Prin Recesses and Adjournments. Once 4 hours have elapsed following the call to order of a meeting, all regular, special, and committee meetings of the Board of Directors shall be adjourned at the conclusion of the agenda item under consideration, unless the board votes to extend the meeting's length. A meeting may be extended by a majority vote of present and voting members. A motion to extend a meeting may or may not state a time when the board meeting will conclude. If such a time is set, a motion may be made and a majority of the board may pass an additional motion to extend. Any remaining action and discussion items on the agenda at the time of adjournment will automatically carry forward to the next meeting of the board or respective committee, or to a time set by a majority of the board. I wanted to add just a couple of comments here. It really is the responsibility of the board member conducting a meeting to manage the time. And I think that at any point within the meeting, it would be good to do a time check and to ask other board members for their consideration of either postponing a topic or limiting the discussion of a topic. And I think that we have done that on some occasions in some of the meetings, and it's been fairly effective. But this also gives some good guidance for the chairs of those committees or the chair of the board to enforce that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Comments? Questions? Director Bouquet?
As someone who has to wake up at 5:30 in the morning to teach and then teaches till 3 and then coaches till 5 and then tries to make a board meeting at 5:30, I'm all in favor of this. But I just had a couple just questions regarding it. I just want to make it kind of public record. Just time sensitive items, I guess, because sometimes we have to vote on contracts ultimately and say, hey, like our next board meeting will be after. I'm just curious how that will kind of impact our schedule, I guess would be the big thing is, hey, do those items move up forward? I guess the other thing is we start our meetings with public comment for our board meetings, and then, I haven't experienced this yet, but I've seen plenty of school board meetings where public comments can go for hours. So I am curious if there has been a consideration of, in theory, do we cut off at a point of when it comes down to public comment, if it's going to, impact the ultimate timeline of the board meeting, which I'm not in favor of. I want the public to obviously have a voice. So I guess those would just be my two considerations: is time-sensitive matters that we'd have to ultimately vote on. How would that impact our schedule? And then also public comment that's going past it. Has that been in consideration? So thank you.
I think those are very good questions. I think the first one, it would be easy for the chair to be working with our staff to say what needs to happen tonight, if it starts looking that way. And the second one, if we have something that it raises that much public, it's probably worth sticking around and doing. So that's why we've drafted in, the ability to extend it, and either extend it to a time and then extend it again, or just say we're going to finish everything we're doing tonight. Looks like Ms. Johnson has something to add.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. I would just like to offer up the intent in having pre-meetings with those committee chairs is to outline what comes before you all. And quite naturally, if in fact there is something that's time critical, that would be assessed. And then more specifically, as the current agenda stands, recommended action items go first. And from a staff perspective, we work in tandem, recognizing that there's recurring contractual obligations that may need to come before this body for action. So all of that would be addressed if everybody's in alignment and doing what we're intended to do for the betterment of the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Whitmore, Director Whitmore. I'm sorry, were you done? Okay.
So in my 5 years, I think we've had at least 3 meetings where we began on one day and ended on the next. And that's not a good thing. So I appreciate the spirit of limiting to around 4 hours. In regard to the prioritization, if we run up against something that has to happen, then we have the flexibility to extend for a half hour or an hour to make sure that we do the business that needs to be done for, our constituents' sake. So I think this makes some sense, and I appreciate it. And no more meetings that start on one day and end on the next, please.
Thank you, Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just in support of what's already been said, remember that all this does is give us the power to control our own destiny. And if we say, okay, this must be addressed tonight, and if we need to extend, we'll extend. It will also serve, I believe, to help keep us on task. We have not often had to do this, but I remember at least in 1 or 2 meetings where I've had to call for the orders of the day. And that simply is a parliamentary expression for saying, can we go back to the agenda, please, and recognize we're talking about X and not about A, B, and C. And if we do that and keep ourselves focused, we'll do fine. I think it's a reasonable rule. It has lots of flexibility. And relative to public comment, there have only been, in my 7 years on the board, there have only been 2 public comment sessions that went for more than like 30 minutes or so. So it's not something that we are routinely pestered with. I think the public is always very focused, and I love it particularly when our employees and the operators come and talk to us. But even in the most volatile of circumstances, one time when we were taken over by a group of protesters and had some 45 wheelchairs in this room, we still got through all of that in about 40 minutes, and everybody had their speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I would note that Director Williams has joined us online. I do not see any hands for anyone online or anyone else here. I would just say, you know, if there are, if anyone has interest, concerns with actual language, the wordsmithing, to please, you know, we have not gotten this down the road. It'll go to the executive committee, it'll go to the board, but it's still at a time where you could get back to our board office or to me, and we could take a look at any concerns. Anybody, could I get a thumbs up here? General support? Okay, thanks. All right. Ah, did I see? Was there a hand? Okay. Okay, now we have a couple of items that our executive manager, Kroll, will handle for us. The first one is the bylaws and board document review and tentative timeline.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Geisinger. And this is Jack Kroll, for the record, Executive Manager of the Board Office. You know, one of the things that I noticed in my short time here is that the board has done a tremendous amount of work on its bylaws recently, particularly as it relates to meetings and committees. And there were some revisions to the officer elections and the various powers of the executive committee and the chair of the board. But as you read through the rest of that document, there's a lot of love that can be given to it in other places. And one of the things that I think will be can be a hallmark for good governance is not just reviewing it when the need arises, but setting everything on a schedule and a plan to be reviewed over a certain set time frame. 3 years is the rule of thumb that I'm using. You know, so as we go through this process, and I'll show you in a moment here, kind of the timeline, rough timeline. You know, it's nothing that you're being asked to approve, or this is just my sense of when we might be able to bring this through the board, and it might have to be adjusted with some of the other changes that are coming forward. But generally speaking, we want to make sure that we're setting a consistent review of our policies, or your policies rather, and that you know, nothing gets left by the wayside for too long. Nothing in that timeline and that cadence, however, will ever preclude the board from revisiting something on a, you know, a more expeditious schedule. So generally speaking, this is the process here that I'm proposing to review bylaw changes. So the board office would work in consultation with senior leadership team and relevant members of the senior leadership team to propose any changes to a given bylaw. The executive committee or policy, given bylaw or policy, the executive committee would review, discuss, and offer feedback in month 1. Later that month, the full board would review, discuss, and offer feedback. Then that feedback would be reincorporated into the potential change in the policy or the bylaw before coming back as a recommended action and following the same steps. There's a few things to note here. Bylaws require 10 votes to be changed, as the chair referenced earlier. The additional thing is that bylaw changes also there has to be a notice according to the current bylaws of an impending change 10 days in advance. That should align with when we publish the executive committee agenda. So when that packet goes out, that's typically been 10 days in advance. If for whatever reason that's not the case, we'll make sure the board office gets it out. But effectively, that's the process. This is a rough timeline here I've broken down each section of the bylaws, sort of assessed how weighty those bylaws are, made some notes here of when the last known updates were. Two additional items beyond the bylaws, you'll note there at the bottom, we're bringing the expense and reimbursement policy through for an update. That will go for discussion at next week's board meeting and then come back as a recommended action in November. The agency also did some significant work to update its record retention policy. This is not necessarily a policy that the board has typically approved in the past, but there are a lot of board documents that you all have going back to 1970s and the 80s. And, you know, I'm going to work with the general counsel's team and the appropriate staff there to kind of bring forward a recommendation on what our retention schedule ought to be for some of these documents. And we can go into more detail on that when that comes forward. But it's an area of risk, frankly, to have so many documents still here, because if we received a core request for them, well, Taishrei, Jillian, Marie, and I might have to take a trip out somewhere to go dust off some old boxes. Not to be flippant about it, but the policy has been basically keep everything for all time, and that might not be the best approach. So with that, I'm happy to.
Any questions or concerns? Thank you, Mr. Kroll. And thank you for bringing that forward. I think it's great to be getting the bylaws on a regular review schedule. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much. I was just going to ask if we could get copies of those materials because they weren't in the board packet. And it's all great work, and I'm very much in favor of doing this on a regular basis. We, from time to time, have said, oh, we need to look at this, and we do it, but it's more ad hoc. And I think a structured approach is wonderful. I would like to make sure we all get copies of that. Thank you.
Great. See any hands online? Anybody else? Great. We're catching up. The next topic is also for Mr. Kroll to talk about the process for developing annual committee work plans, which is also something that he has brought to the board.
Great, thank you, Chair. Annual committee work plans on their most basic function is just agreed upon outline for the timing of the work that a committee is to complete. Basically an outline that the committee and the full board kind of agrees to at the beginning of the year for the planned discussion items and the planned action items to come through any given committee. I think this is really important to do. You know, there's oftentimes issues that come up from board members that may warrant a response, but that has to fit within the context of everything else that the administration is planning to bring forward too. And, you know, to get the best response, it ought to be something that fits in the broader scheme of a work plan. Here's just kind of the general process. This is not set in stone. This is, you know, something that I think could work well. And depending on how your conversation on this goes tonight, we can take and incorporate additional feedback and bring back something for your consideration in November. But in effect, in your January meeting, you're going to elect chairs and vice chairs of your committees. Then my vision for this would be that the chair and the vice chair of those committees meet with the senior leadership team members that staff those committees. Those senior leadership team members will have a good sense of what they need to bring forward as a staff over the course of the year, whether that's a contract, whether that's a service change, et cetera, and they can outline all of that. then, based on the feedback that the chair and the vice chair are getting from their committee members on issues that may be of significant importance, certain topics that the board wants to discuss and consider in addition to those can be incorporated into a draft work plan that is then circulated amongst committee members. It receives discussion at the February board meeting, or committee and board meeting, and then comes back in the subsequent month in March for approval. And you're sort of all committing to this plan for the year. And then a good plan should leave space for when things arise, you can fit that in. The other item I would add here is if the chair creates or continues to have a certain ad hoc committee, that ad hoc committee should have a work plan for a given year as well. And with that, I've introduced the idea, and I'll yield it back all to you for discussion.
Great. I'm reminded of Dwight Eisenhower's quote when he said, "Planning is everything and plans are nothing." And I don't think plans are nothing, but I do think it's important that these plans, as you were outlining, are flexible. We're not going to expect staff to have everything ready to go for the year ahead, but they'll know when the budget's coming and things like that. And obviously there'll be things that will come up with the committee. So just to point that out. And Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kroll. I really am in support of this wholeheartedly, but I have just a couple suggestions. One would be that prior to the beginning of 2024, when we will be selecting executive committee, chair, and then chairs of the respective committees, that it might be helpful to have just a template for a work plan, so that if somebody is interested in chairing a committee, they will know kind of what is expected of them. That's just one of my suggestions. Just number one, a template, and number two, just kind of an outline. Also, an outline of staff's work plan that the committee will have to address over time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Davidson, if you don't mind, Ms. Johnson, do you see any problem with this? Any for the staff? Is she supportive of this process?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I believe it would be helpful recognizing the board's responsibility relative to approving a budget. There are certain elements that go hand in hand with that, and recognizing, as I said in my previous comments, relative to the coordination and understanding the partnership in which leadership team members have, as well as I have with my role in coordinating with the executive committee and what we currently have as the performance committee. I think it is a step in the right direction to manage all expectations, and then more so have an understanding of what might be feasible. I believe more so this will be quite helpful when this body convenes, in the sense of having a retreat, recognizing that there are some critical elements that are important to this body. Having a work plan basically garners an understanding amongst all about what the path forward will be. So at this juncture, I would say no, it would be something. Mr. Kroll indicated that, there'd be members of the leadership team that coordinate with the committee chairs. I would add to that, I would like to be involved, because ultimately most of these actions are authorizing me in my capacity of the GM and CEO to engage. So that is just one addition I would like to put forward for your consideration if this comes to fruition. Thank you.
Okay, we'll let you be involved. All right, I see Director Davidson, and then after that, Director Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Kroll, thanks for putting this together and for bringing this forward. I think this is a very good step in the right direction. And I thank you to the CEO and General Manager for noting the retreat. I think this is a useful tool for that. We had a discussion at this past retreat around priorities, and some of those have informed some things we've tackled this year. So I think this can become something we get into a rhythm of to improve the quality of the outcome of the retreats. And I'd also like to note that, when it comes to ad hoc committees, the audit committee, ad hoc audit committee needed to go through a process that had a project plan and had milestones and had things we had to coordinate with external contractors and staff members. I think my only question, and this may be a little bit of a teaser of a topic to come, is when we have things that go over multiple years. So the Ad hoc Audit Committee had work over the course of 2 years that didn't fit tidily into 12 months. Same is true for, I think, some of the changes coming to Performance Committee. So I think maybe there's some just things we'll get used to and find in the rhythm. But one thing I was also going to note on this is that this becomes a great, and I think an invaluable tool to future board members, to future committees as they change, to have the previous year's work plan. And a lot will be boilerplate, and we'll start to get a sense of how things roll out. I'm thinking most about Performance Committee right now, where we seem to just kind of be repeating things each year. And this can actually become a record to develop some consistency, especially given that we are an elected board that turns over. So anyway, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I think this is great, and thank you, Mr. Kroll.
Thank you. Director Williams.
I'm going to do the best I can. I have a mouthful of stitches, so if you
Oh.
can't understand me, let me
Okay.
know. I think it's a great idea. I think that it needs to include the definition of what the committee's purpose is at the beginning of the layout of the plan, and to remind each committee why they're there and what they're trying to do. I think if that statement is made, that all the rest of it is great and will help us to move forward.
Thank you very much. I think that's very well taken, and as Director Catlin just mentioned to me, and also tied to our strategic goals. But it sounds like we're generally supportive of this. Thank you for bringing it forward, Mr. Kroll. Next item is feedback on our smaller committees. We had a 2021 bylaw change that came from the work of an ad hoc committee that was led by Director Tisdale and former Director, now Transportation Commissioner Shelley Cook. And on the committee structure, we reduced both the number of standing committees and the number of board members on each committee. And at the time, there was a lot of discussion that we would circle back and get some feedback. So that's what I'm doing here is, let's see how the change is working. I've asked Director Tisdale to kick this off, and Director Williams may well be able to give us some feedback as our two committee chairs.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, if you look at packet page 14, you'll see the historical note that we created back at the time when we were talking about doing this change. And it was decided when we came up with the change that the board would do a look back to see if in fact this was functioning well. One of the things that we were concerned about was, could we hopefully help make board meetings shorter by having the committee meetings have a full explication, exposure, if you will, of an idea through the committee members, but that all board members were invited to attend and were entitled to speak at the committee meetings. It's just that they didn't vote, and then the matter would come before the full board. I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure that we did not succumb to what, as I described in that historical note, government by the elites. There was a concern, because this is what happened back when we went to committees of the whole in 2007, was there was this fear that just the committee members were aware of what was going on and the full board didn't really have any picture. And so they said, well, we'll fix that. We'll make everything a committee of the whole. That, I think, was a cumbersome conclusion. And the state audit back in 2010 told us it was a cumbersome conclusion. And about 10 years later, we said, okay, fine, we'll change it.
We heard you.
The mills of God grind exceeding slow, but they grind exceeding small. In any event, we came up with this solution. My own view is that it has worked well and that no board member has been isolated from the process at all. With that said, we're looking for feedback at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Williams, I see your hand is up. Can you?
Yeah, similar, my comments are very similar to Doug's, that Director Tisdale's, that we have benefited, we believe, from the committees that were broken out, and that many times, almost all of the directors are at. I've been chairing the ops committee, and a lot of good stuff has happened there. And it makes our overall board meetings well educated and better informed, I think.
Thank you. Looking for other hands online. Director Whitmore.
I'd just like to thank Director Tisdale and Commissioner Cook for their hard work on this matter a year or two ago. After working in both situations, I think the word cumbersome is appropriate from Director Tisdale doing it the old way. I have found the committee meetings far more productive with the smaller committees. It seems like we get more accomplished, have better discussions, and the fact that anybody on the board, well, anybody can attend and comment, I think is the stroke of genius on how to do that. So I'm all in favor of the small committee approach continuing in 2024 and beyond.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any other comments. I will say, I think it's worked out very well. I think we get a lot of good work and a lot of good conversations. There are occasions where I think, wow, I wish the whole board would hear this. And I've even said to people occasionally, well, you should go back and look at the, look at that discussion. I think one of those is our survey discussion at the performance committee this week. It's certainly worth everyone taking a full look at the survey if you haven't done so. I know Ms. Johnson sent something out, but generally I tend to agree. I think it's working well. Director Catlin.
Thank you. I'm in support of these smaller committees. And I think the only times that I have found there to be a little bit of an awkward moment is when the committee moves something forward, but the full board may want to discuss that. So I think we do have the opportunity to pull something from a consent agenda, but I think we haven't really defined what that process might look like. It's only happened a couple times, but it can be a little awkward.
Dr. Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to note something similar, Director Catlin, you brought up. That's that, there have been some times, I think Director Tisdale did this recently with the Finance and Planning meeting, just saying, even though it was unanimous at committee, this was worth the whole board hearing. Let's bring it forward at the board meeting. And I think that is a good practice when that it does arise. And for one, I would say I think this has been great. And something we talked about 2 retreats ago was the importance of having committee chairs present reports at the board meetings. I think that has been helpful. I think we should continue to really, look to our committee chairs to do that. And I think the committee plans also present an opportunity to give a look forward and state things that are going to be coming before the committee that directors might want to come and attend as well. So for one, I think these have been great. I think they've been useful, and I think we should continue down this path. And I would also just encourage continued use of those committee chair reports, and also appreciate Dr. Catlin's point and Director Tisdale utilizing that recently of bringing things to the full board. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other conversation, we will move on. Thanks for the feedback. One of the next things is getting some feedback on an idea that's been circulating a bit of setting certain committee appointments for 2 years. And the idea is that after the election year, we would make committee appointments. And I think it's really the executive committee that makes the appointments mostly at this point. We'd make committee appointments, and I guess in my vision, and nothing's written yet, but that those would generally be considered 2-year appointments in order to gain expertise and consistency. I'm going to turn this over here in a minute to Director Davidson, who has also been thinking along these lines and raising the idea. But I think that, especially for this year and maybe generally, we would want to keep it flexible, but that would be, the hope is that we could keep committees same for next year. Dr. Davidson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is one I think, we need to get some feedback on and would encourage directors to talk about it here and also to reach out with feedback and ideas. This one's tricky to get right, I think. But the Ad Hoc Audit Committee went through a real head scratcher here, that audit absolutely has to have consistency on its committee. And there has to be good mechanisms in place to retain institutional knowledge and committee knowledge and progress, again, past those things that fit tidily into 12 months. So we went through an effort that, in some ways seemed longer than it should be, but it turned out tricky to do the math. We brought in these outside experts to serve as outside members, and then we had to think about how to stagger terms, both with our RTD elected board members and our outside committee members. I think in many ways, we're still learning. We'll have our look back in a couple of years on that, but we did put forward something now that we can actually work an audit plan, a multi-year audit plan. I'm living through performance committee right now again, I mentioned that it seems like we kind of repeat every January, and this is something that our general manager and CEO has dealt with in her role. And I think it's something that the board needs to really consider. How do we develop consistency across these committees? One thing, speaking of 2010 being a little while ago and reacting to the state audit report, in the presentation, we had the language that, the state auditor had noted that having a dedicated committee membership is a primary means by which board members can develop subject matter expertise. The other thing that they had stated at the time, and I'm going to read this, it's in the packet page 21. Although board members receive a $12,000 annual stipend authorized under state statute, many board members have other full-time careers. I appreciate that note. Statute also does not require board members to possess specialized expertise. Given these realities, ensuring that the board's committee structure provides for an adequate division of labor and subject matter expertise is important for increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of the limited time that individual members may have available to board to devote to board activities. So what I'd like to note there is, between the two notes that the auditor pointed out, having a dedicated committee structure allows us as directors to develop the expertise in the individual committee, get used to those work plans, develop the relationships with staff, and maintain consistency of work plan. It also affords us the opportunity, when we are talking about committee work plans, to consider those on a multi-year basis when we have these have our retreats and we're talking about a board we know will be together for at least 2 years. And the other thing I'll note is that when someone does come in with some expertise that's relevant to a committee, we should pull them in that committee. This is something that the board auditor noted as being a potential risk of the elected board, is that we don't have to have specialized expertise. So when we have it, if we have a public finance expert, it'd be great to have them on the finance and planning committee. Likewise on the operational side. So, I don't think this is fully defined. I think in many ways it's Groundhog Day, Director Catlin, going back to how would you think about consistency, and what happens if a whole committee turns over, which I suppose is a risk now anyway. But I just wanted to open the floor to discussion around, how do we start to tackle this? Is it every committee? Is it certain committees? We did this for audit, and I think we need to explore it across the whole board. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments, feedback? Any thoughts? Yes? Director Bouquet.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Have you guys started planning out like the feasibility if this would happen come the 2024 cycle? So regarding it, because the way I'm interpreting this, and my apologies, is we're referring to our 3 standing committees, correct? So we've looked at already the feasibility of where all the directors are. So for instance, me being on operations, does this count as my first year in operations? And therefore I'd go to operations next year as a standing committee member? Or is it that since I've been on that standing committee for 2 years, I have the opportunity to then jump to the financial committee? I'm just curious if the feasibility has been discussed or not, so.
No, and that's,
Okay.
I think that this is a less considered. It's really initial feedback, and that's exactly the situation that I was saying. I think certainly, and I think the policy should be flexible anyhow. If somebody says, I really want to be on finance next year, but certainly this year, the appointments were made for 1 year. I think if we were to move toward this, it would be, this is, sort of the suggestion. That's my thought. That's not any, any decision. So tell me what you think. Tell us what you think.
I like the idea. I'm just kind of thinking about the overall feasibility of it. I'm just thinking about it. Again, this is coming from a teacher brain of like, we're going to lose, could we potentially lose committee members due to election? That's like a huge factor when it comes down to it. If you don't have directors you're going to run or not.
Wouldn't do it during the election. I mean, it would start at this year after the election. And
Okay.
would go till next year. So it would be the 2 years where there's no change in
Okay.
the board.
I would be all for it. I think it's just having the flexibility. If a director has a desire. So for instance, I speak for myself. I've served on operations for 2 years and I love the operations, and probably will be on operations next year, I'm hoping, because I want to develop that expertise in that specific field. But again, I think it's more than fair for a director to say, hey, I want to also jump to, X, or I want to jump from one standing committee to another. But I would be in favor of it. I don't see many downfalls as long as it's feasible and you have flexibility. So thank you.
Great. That's good feedback. Thank you. Director Whitmore, jumping around. Director Whitmore, is that you next?
I guess so. Just one question. I assume this does not include the exec committee, so that would be a 1-year
Right.
continuation. Okay. All right. I think it has, otherwise I think it does have some merit for some more head scratching.
First Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And pointing back to the work plans, if we develop some comprehensive work plans for the committees that may span more than 1 year, if there is a particular item of interest to a board member who may be sitting on the other committee, they might be able to make a request to switch over based on a specific area of interest.
Good.
That gets back to your flexibility point, Madam Chair.
Right. Director Guzman.
Not knowing anything else, because we haven't even finished a full year yet on this board, I'm excited to hear this. My concern was flexibility, so I'm glad to hear that's there. However, I do have to say, Performance Committee, which I sit on, it does, and it is going to require some dedicated people to stick around to make sure that the plans go forward correctly, so that there is continuity and that there is forward-moving momentum that is not lost. Even if some new members are brought on with flexibility, there needs to be enough people there to continue the work that's been started, because it is good work. And I think all of them are that way, but that working plan, that's the key. If somebody's going to join or looking at doing it, I don't necessarily want to feel restricted in being able to learn about the other committees, but I selectively ask to be on the committees that I currently serve on for a reason. And if you don't expand your knowledge, then you never have the opportunity to grow, right? And so that would prevent somebody from becoming a member of perhaps the executive council for a year. And so if that's the direction that this is going, I think it's good, but I agree, some head scratching, really thoughtful, comprehensive way to look at this in a holistic manner. Take a drink. To be able to continue forward with that work is really important. I don't always know what's going on with safety and operations if I don't make the meeting, but I do read my notes and I try to watch and go back and review. So I think that this is a good thing. But I know where my focus needs to be because I am on a specific committee. So I want to make sure that that's where my attention is all of the time. That's all. Thanks.
Great. Good feedback. Thanks. Director Davidson.
Yeah, this is great feedback, and thanks. And to your point, Chair and Director Bouquet, yeah, not fully formed yet, which is why I think we want to start collecting these ideas. I did want to comment on the election piece because, you know, as you were talking about that, Director Bouquet, I'm kind of chuckling thinking about what we talked about with audit. And something I might put out there is this would be tricky, but we could think about, this may not be bylaws, this may be our practices and standard procedures, but we could identify when we make these committee appointments, we sort of already have some consistency on these committees. Many of us have been on the same committees, but we could think about the mix of newer members and members, I should say staggered elections. And make sure that we have, I'm going to use the term succession planning kind of loosely, but thinking about leadership development in those committees, thinking about how we make sure we don't have a major disruption in election. It may be that we mix committees where we say, of course, if we have the expertise, we want someone on a particular relevant committee, but we may say that by having the right mix of, this group that's in 2 years and this group that's in 4 years, we can prevent some of those disruptions you're referring to. So head scratcher, I agree with the comments that have been made. The ad hoc audit, we were putting together these Excel charts that would stagger everybody and extend it out by about 10 years and take a look at how they overlapped. And that may be something we want to do here as we all think about this and as it relates to our individual expertise. So if that stimulates some more conversation, then great. Thank you.
Director Bouquet.
Yes, I have been stimulated by the conversation. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's just important for us to realize that you potentially could have your majority of your board gone in an election. In theory, you could potentially lose your majority of your board. And I think that's what is the priorities, I think, is what we can consider, because it's like, in theory, you have 8 new board members, and how do you stagger that? Is the priority of it for it to continue with those, those action plans? And therefore, it might not necessarily be expertise then, when those 8 members come on. So I think that would just be consideration of potentially how high a turnover could potentially happen, and of course, staggering. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, good point. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone online, so thank you for the feedback. We are moving very well on our schedule. Next section is best practices, and this gets at a few different things. The first one is talking about respecting staff work plans and time. And, there are a couple of ways this has been coming up recently. One of them is that Jack Kroll and Deborah Johnson and I have been working, and John McKay and others have been working on, how we get, how we communicate within the agency with questions from constituents or from board members, and who should get what, and how it's tracked and all of those things. And honestly, those questions are not decided. We're still working on them. I think Jack and Deborah and I are meeting next week, and Deborah and Jack and John McKay are meeting to work on some of those. And the other one is, just board members needing information. And all of those things come down to, the issue of how we respect the fact that our staff have a lot on their plates and, want to be responsive to the board, and how we are respecting that. The fact that there's only so much that the team can do with limited resources. And it was pointed out that there are 2 resolutions included in tonight's packet that were passed by this board. As far as I know, they're both in effect, but basically I'll look at the second one in 1996, that requests from a board member or subset of board members which are anticipated to take 4 or more hours on a single subject should be channeled through the chair or full board for approval. That was responding to issues at the time. But what we're looking for is, how do we respect our staff's time and still ensure that board members are appropriately supported, either in getting responses for their constituents or in information for themselves. So looking for some feedback on that, on these, potentially on this 4-hour rule that the board in the past has done, or just more generally, any feedback we have. Director Bouquet.
I'm active tonight, thank you.
Yeah, you're good. It's good.
I'm on my 3rd cup of coffee though, so. I'm gonna keep going. I think has there been discussion regarding just like board members channeling communication to the chair, and the chair acting as like the liaison of the board when it comes down to just talking with staff or talking with the CEO or GM?
You know, I was seeing different people respond. I think the problem is we haven't found the perfect solution. And I see Ms. Johnson sort of with the response on her face, so I'd like you to address this too. There has been discussion of channeling through the board office. And I think that that's kind of where we're coming out is that these issues should go to our team in the board office. Sometimes they're not quite sure, you know, where they go. But I think Jack and I have been talking some today even about, you know, that in the past, before this staff and everyone else, we would send things in for this, what they call them, AGMs. What's that, Melanie? GMRs, yeah, the general manager, something. But then we'd never hear anything back. And I think with Ms. Johnson and others, that policy has really been, you know, there's been an effort to change it. And I know that Jack and Taishrei and Jillian and Marie are all working hard to do that. So there is an effort to channel it through the board office. But there are things, it's hard to know what goes to Ms. Johnson, what goes to me, what goes to, you know, those are the kind of issues we're working on. So anybody else, either of you'd like to respond, Deborah or Jack?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to Director Bouquet. The reason why I had a pensive look on my face is because I don't think that everything has to go to the chair. I report to this body collectively, and you appointed the chair, but I report to the board of directors, and you as individual comprise the board. So I don't want that to be stifled, because that's very analogous to me saying to Melanie, no, you can't talk to me, you need to go around and talk to someone else. So that is not conducive, I think, to the betterment of this organization and how I'm leading this organization in tandem with you providing policy direction. So with that as a backdrop, I think the issue that is prevalent for me is inundation of emails, but not understanding who's on first. So case in point, I may get an email from a board member that's copied to the board, and it could be a member of my staff that says, I need you all to respond. Well, when you do that, who's on first? Because somebody's making an assumption. There was a situation just the other day that was brought to my attention. In some instances, I'm not included on the initial inquiry, and then when there's no response, then I get a thread saying, oh, no one's responded to this, or unbeknownst to me, there's other staff that are running in circles because somebody may have responded directly, and that communique wasn't shared with me with having the responsibility. So I find this to be quite a quagmire here at this organization, because I've worked in others where there was processes that were instituted. And so when you think about the board's role from a policy vantage point and then operational matters, if one has a question about, you know, operational aspect or something like that, does that need to come to me? Not necessarily. And that's something that could be done through a standard process where something is tracked and you're utilizing, you know, a case number and it goes full circle, because there could be multiple channels utilizing our CRM, which is customer relations management software, because this could be some inquiry that was sent through a multitude of different conduits because somebody wants a response in an expeditious fashion. So then we run the risk of having somebody in the organization at a different level responding, but then maybe something's come to my office and we're disparate in reference to what we're doing. So there needs to be a focused approach, and then basically qualifying it. Is it operational administrative? If it's from a policy vantage point, I think that's imperative, because there's a delineation quite naturally, and I don't have a problem with sharing information with the board. Quite naturally, you guys are representing a constituency that's utilizing the services that we provide. So I just think we need to hone in on what it is that we're doing, because in certain instances, everybody's globbing around and wanting to be responsive, and in that vein, we're missing the opportunity to actually be consistent with how we're addressing concerns and doing it in a deliberate and meaningful fashion. So I think there's opportunity. I know I've spoken with the board executive manager, John McKay, that's on my staff, having worked previously in the board office. There's certain examples that we can leverage, and there's been a multitude of different things. I know Mr. Kroll had reached out after I had inquired, you know, utilizing Apta Connect, because we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. We're not the only transit agency that represents multitude of different constituencies and deliver transit services. It's just being succinct. And basically, we often are creatures of habit, because when I hear about this former process, it was established because the chair just said this, I wasn't here, so I'm going to repeat what you said. There was that GMR process, and it was created because perhaps somebody in a seat that I'm currently sitting wasn't responsive. I pride myself on being responsive, so I don't want to use a cookie cutter approach because we're dealing with different issues here. So first, we have to recognize what is the problem we're trying to solve for, and then address it in a very cohesive fashion. So that's what I would offer up as to the comments that I would like to share, or that I've shared. Thanks.
that you shared. And I want Jack to respond too, but I think you can hear sort of the complexity of this and, you know, what we're struggling with. And it's to make sure that directors get what they need and are able to talk to the right person and to figure out exactly how to make that work. And a piece of this is, you know, like I said, there's this 4-hour rule, but really, you know, a big piece of it is picking and choosing what you need. And then I think the best source is going to the board office with your questions. Jack, you want to address this?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The big issues that we have identified so far in my time here are directors knowing when something has gone forward to staff for review. So you might write into the board office, but you might not know, hey, we've opened a case on this. We also, and the situation gave rise to it this week, you know, need to make sure that we're informing board members when something has been addressed. And this, we'll just have to ask for your grace, you know, means you're going to get a little bit more email traffic because you're going to know when something is opened and know when something is closed. And, you know, we can continue to refine that. I'm dedicated to working with the GM and CEO, as well as John McKay on her team, to making sure that we're routing things and triaging things appropriately. You know, one thing we don't have control over in the board office, and neither do any of you, is the inputs to our system, the inputs to our process for getting a response. On any given day in a massive system, you have one of the largest systems in the country with many different routes, there's going to be things that just don't work the way that we would hope them to. And so those various different types of requests are going to be, you know, there's going to be an unlimited universe potentially of various different things that could arise that might need to be responded to. We are in the process of building, and the intent is to have something out that's new come January of 2024 that leverages the existing CRM for the agency Salesforce and really allows us to track on these issues better and also provide data and information back to you all, because I think sometimes that helps put things in perspective. Of course, obviously, you're getting the issues that are coming to you all, but it can also be helpful to have a complete understanding of just how much stuff comes in on a daily basis to frame, you know, the administration and the board office's ability to get these things resolved. Because as the GM and CEO mentioned, and I want to put a fine point on this, our goal is not necessarily to get a response out as quickly as possible, although sometimes it feels like that. Our goal really needs to be to get the most appropriate response out, and in a way that the GM and CEO is appropriately involved and has insights into what's going out the door, because ultimately she's the accountable executive, as she puts it, right? So that's all I have.
Great, thanks. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is an important topic. And I'd like to just thank General Manager and CEO Johnson for your responsiveness. You are extremely responsive, and I appreciate that. Sometimes I do worry, since there are so many of us and one of you, and as it was once put to me, your email inbox is a to-do list created by somebody else. And so I think that the importance here is having process. And Ms. Johnson, you referenced having come from some places, which I think is one of the reasons that this board hired you, is the breadth of your experience from other agencies. You mentioned having some other processes in place, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, ideas that you'd like to share at this time, and if not, that's okay, around processes you might recommend for exactly this topic that would work for you and your staff.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yes, thank you so much, Director Davidson. Yes, having a centralized portal where things go in and we all adhere to that, that's what it boils down to, because recognizing that this is a large board, but even more so, there's different conduits as I specified, right? So utilizing a customer resource management tool where everything goes in so we have an understanding about who's on first. That way there can be a response because, as I said before, we often are doing things in a scattershot approach. And basically, if there's a process whereby something comes into the board office, it will be routed to me appropriately. But I want to be clear, I'm not saying that you as board members can't reach out to me directly. I mean, I know there was some confusion previously when we talked about that, but basically increase that we're getting from constituents and you all need a response, that should go through the board office, and there is a portal where those can be tracked. Now, quite naturally, if we're dealing, and I made eye contact with Director Sloan, so I'll use her, if we're dealing with the issue with the municipality or something like that, I'm not saying if you're talking to a member of a city council, oh my gosh, you can't reach out to me directly and say, I think that's a little different. So that's what I'm talking about. If something's operational in nature, whereby, somebody had a question about, the runtime as it relates to the average speed of a vehicle and what does that mean to the implications of the time points and how we're doing scheduling. That's operational in nature. I don't necessarily have to be privy to that, and that should go through that portal. But on the flip side, if there's something that is happening when we are talking about from a policy vantage point, you're dealing with another policymaker, of course you can reach out to me and copy the board office, and that has happened. I think what Mr. Kroll and I had talked about yesterday, we need to discern what's policy and then what's administrative operational in nature. And then more so, I know that people on the board have been here for a period of time and may have had previous interaction with staff members, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the appropriate staff person to address the question because so-and-so may have worked on a parking issue back in 2017. That doesn't mean that person is still working on said parking issue as it relates to 2023. And I think that's what causes consternation, or if in fact something is confused relative to a topic, right? If we're talking about the influx of migrants in the area versus unhoused, that could be two different people working on something because we're talking about people that need needs, that are in need, doesn't mean it's the same person. And so I think basically what we're working towards is identifying, for instance, identifying a sole contact for a department whereby the board staff can coordinate. And let me just give you some feedback because I did bring this into this organization when I came. So members of the leadership team typically have support personnel, an executive assistant, business support, or things of the like. And recognizing I meet with the leadership team on a recurring basis, my executive assistant, Tina Aragon, leads the charge in working with what I qualify as the administrative coordinating team, the ACT. So if in fact there's increase coming in, that person who coordinates with Tina, who is a surrogate of the leader of the department, basically would have a better understanding of who should address an inquiry that comes in. So there's a single point of contact for the board office. And so they can then shepherd that through their department. And in that way, the leader of said department is aware of what's happening as well. So that's one example. Having the ACT, that's why Tina attends the leadership team meeting. She carries forward information. And then we've had presentations relative to what's happening, i.e. formulating, a new style guide. How is that implemented? How are we utilizing brand messaging? That may be something the ACT talks about, or they can come up with creative solutions. So that is a conduit, I think, that we can leverage here at this organization as opposed to just making an assumption. I want to send this to Director Guzman because I talked to him last time, where actually it should be Director Davidson that gets that. But for all intents and purposes, having that one point of contact through the administrative coordinating team, that individual knows whom within that department would most be appropriate to address this question and can go figure that out. And then that's a point of contact that the board office has. So that's what I would offer up. I'm not saying this is a fait accompli, but this is what I offered up when I had a conversation. And Tina Aragon on my staff has been working with the board office and provided that information relative to the administrative coordinating team as a path forward potentially. Thank you.
Thanks. That's all. All right, if y'all don't mind, I'm going to go to Director Rosenthal online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to reinforce what a lot of folks were saying, and including General Manager, about how important it is that we do direct a lot of our traffic through the board office. And I hope to think that's something that I'm trying to do more and more, particularly as I'm in public a lot as an elected board member. We are responsible to our constituents. We're responsible to make sure that we are listening and we are bringing issues to RTD's attention that folks at RTD may or may not know about. So, to me, that's, I just want to make sure that that's okay, that, that we are doing, what we're supposed to be doing, which is to bring issues to the fore, and that's not necessarily, quote, counted against us, that like, hey, Rosenthal, you're bringing up so many of these issues. You're in the community a lot. We're hearing so many things. I think that's normal. I think that's what we should be doing. And I think that's okay. My concern would be, sort of coming up with ideas or drilling down on maybe issues we're either thinking about on, or before us, issues that are before us on the board, or just things that we think are important, like, oh, you know what, I want a copy of this, I want a copy of that, I need to know this information. Well, that is good, but it is, that's certainly a different issue than maybe some of us in community that are advocating for our constituents. And I just want to make sure that, that's sort of that's in this conversation as well.
Okay, thanks very much. I think you're right. I think it is in the conversation. And that's a tough one too. Do you bring every constituent question forward? Is it, how do you address those? I think the short answer is those need to go to our board office, our very talented board office. Unless, as Ms. Johnson was saying, their policy or, dealing with elected officials, things like that. But I say that as a short answer. It has been difficult for us to parse apart and really put into effect, but we're working on it. So that's great. Director Sloan. Yeah, get it.
Thank you. And I really appreciate, having the opportunity to discuss this. I think this is a basic issue for our governance study session. And it appears to me that the board members don't really know the organization of staff and who's responsible at any particular time for anything. I don't think it is the board members' interest to produce the process. We just need to know what the process is and follow it, because we don't know about prioritization. As Mr. Cole said, how many issues are out there. We don't know how to identify particular staff members. We've been, the former process, as the chair mentioned, things would just disappear. Now it's lovely that we do get quick answers, but apparently I have not been following a preferred process. I think if we all know the process, we can accept it and run with it, and we'll get good answers. There's a reference to Resolution 1996, the more recent resolution, I think should be tossed completely, because it was probably helpful then, and the intent is the same as we're talking about now, but who estimates a staff would be
I think
4
you're right.
hours, and how long does that take? And members of the public, that would take more than 2 hours of work. Well, if the board is bringing it up, it's a board request, not a public request. And the part about being channeled to the full board of directors, which meets once a month, is really not at all helpful. So I think whatever we come up with, should totally contradict the 1996 resolution.
Good, that's good feedback, and I will say that's what the effort is right now, is to come up. I totally agree. The board members, I have trouble figuring out where to send something, so we're getting there, I think, and hopefully we'll have a process that will be easier to follow. Director Harwick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few thoughts here. One, I'm wildly excited about the CRM, and I think there being a situation where our requests are going where they need to go and are getting routed the right way sounds like a really just great thing for everybody, for us as board members, but also just as staff, and being able to track like, oh, hey, I received, I'm guessing maybe there was something about, what happened in Arvada the other day, and maybe that's what you were referring to. But either way, like something happened in Arvada, and I'm, glad that it was resolved. But I feel like, maybe there was like 8 different tendrils of information going out there, and luckily it was resolved. But I think the management system would have been really helpful. And so I'm psyched about that, because I don't think that the 4-hour question is the right question we should be asking. It's just how can we be more efficient and be more effective with our time and with our staff's time. So anything we can do to do that is exciting for me. But if we are going to get stuck on the 4-hour, if we are not getting rid of that, I just want to recognize a couple things, that there are a couple directors here that have their constituents are highly reliant upon transit, much more so than my constituents in Arvada. We have 3 lines. Anyone that represents Denver or Aurora is going to just be inundated with calls, and so I think if we have a 4-hour commitment, that's not particularly fair to those board directors, whereas for me, like, it's an easy thing, and I can be like, hey, I'm not getting anywhere near that staff time, but if we are going to hold to that, we just need to be we need to recognize that there are directors that have certain issues that we don't, some of us don't. And also that's where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just note that the more recent of those 2 talks about 4 hours on a single subject, which I also don't find very helpful, because what's the subject? Is it this one constituent? Is it this other? So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just, that's what their effort was. Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. But I was prepared to say at first, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think the 4-hour rule is good. We had a number of occasions several years ago where we literally had our staff being bogged down by requests to the board office to provide listings of all kinds of data that just took up a huge amount of time. And can you research in the minutes, please, and find every time that we referenced a certain subject? And it obviously was just very, very burdensome, and we had to make sure that we reminded the director involved of the 4-hour rule, and I think that's still important. But I really see that this discussion is talking about 2 different things. First of all, how much time can we demand of staff? And then secondly, how do we demand things of staff? And the policy that I learned, and as chair I certainly enforced, was to tell directors, focus your communications on the board office in order to allow coordination of requests and to get the best possible response. You should, of course, as an elected board member, feel free to reach out to the general manager at any time on any question, but for heaven's sakes, have the foresight, if you will, to copy the board office on that request too, so that the board office can, again, coordinate and understand this. And one other thing, and I don't know if this is sort of an stated part of the agenda here, it should not be the task of a director to reach out to people other than the board office and the general manager unless it is urgent and important. Understandably, there are circumstances where that would arise, but if you feel you want to ask the AGM for buses a certain question, you really should, in the first instance, funnel it through the board office and say, tell me. Now, you can, as necessary, again, certainly if it's urgent and important, reach out to them. But otherwise, be respectful of their time. As mayor, I used to lecture the city council a lot and say, look, if you have a problem with Public Works, you don't call up and complain to Public Works. You call up and complain to the city manager. If the problem isn't fixed, you don't fire the Public Works director, you fire the city manager. And we have the same situation here. So you bring up the problem to the general manager and to the board office and say, can you please address this? And that, I submit, will give you the best possible answer. But don't be too quick to throw out the 4-hour rule. It's something that has served us well over the years and certainly takes care of situations where a director can abuse staff time by saying, I want to know, for example, we had this issue arise, every piece of property that is owned by the RTD. And we couldn't put staff on that. I mean, that's just ridiculous. We did ask capital programs ultimately to give us a list, and they did. But it's not a question of saying, okay, now you have to drop everything and produce this for me. No, we can't do that. So work through the board office, coordinate, get the best answer, and I think we will find that it works well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. Director Guzman.
I didn't realize it was my turn. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Here's my problem, right? I'm glad we're talking about this, but I have been working on an issue for months, and trying to be respectful of this rule has required me to delay getting work done for months because it requires more than I can ask of the staff currently to get one single project done. And it's one issue in one area. So I have put in countless hours of my own time after reading board documents, after preparing for meetings, after participating in committees, after showing up to community events, to research municipal codes without help, to research legal issues without help, on my own, finding a way to do it as an elected member of the board to answer a question for my constituent. I would point out to the members of this body and anybody else listening that we each represent about, what, 270,000 constituents each, more or less, right?
205 or something, I'm not sure.
Still more than a state senator.
Yeah.
And they have office staff individual to them to do that work. We share 4 office staff in the board. So there is something to that to be considered, right? How much do I need to delay on an issue to be respectful of staff time and trying to do it the right way, right? I'm also on the hook. I'm responsible for getting an answer to constituents and doing the meetings and setting them up and doing all of that part. So I do want to be respectful of staff time. I don't want everybody here all night. I get up at 3:30 in the morning to get to my work right after the board meeting on Wednesday, right? So I get it. It's a delicate subject, but sometimes an issue may require more time than others. And I always try to be respectful of that. I think I have good relationships with our board staff and with the GM CEO, as well as with her staff. And I try not to reach out to anybody other than those 2 people if I'm not sure where it's going. If it's an ongoing matter, I have already discussed it. We've gotten permission to be able to continue a dialogue with an individual, but it's been routed properly. So I do take Director Tisdale's remark seriously that, you know, we need to find out who we're supposed to be working with and then go from there and be respectful of that time. However, delaying an answer for months to try and respect a 4-hour rule on an issue is incredibly painful and difficult. And begging for patience from somebody does get to a breaking point, even I think for the best of directors. And so I just want to keep that in mind. I don't know if throwing it out isn't exactly the right thing to do, but I don't know that limiting what we need to do with respect to public service is the, it's the counterbalance to that. And so I'm not sure where I'd fall on this, but I'm glad we're having the conversation either way. Just from a personal perspective, I would say this has caused me a lot of consternation and a lot of extra work on my part that I probably could reach out to somebody on staff and say, hey, I know you are the expert in this and you probably have a really good connection. Can you at least help me get there? But I am hesitant at best and scared at the worst to reach out to anybody because it seems like we as directors are not invited to do so all the time, right? And that cuts two ways. Sometimes we have to and sometimes we don't. But when we do, it better be important. That's all I'm saying, right? And I'm not sure that there's anything other than cultural practice and each one teaching one, if you've had to deal with those issues before, for the folks that may be joining this board in a year, to give that guidance and shepherd us through that process. So.
Well, I think, that's a very good comment. And I think that that's a reminder that, if we keep this rule or really any of our rules, flexibility is key. And I don't think anybody's wanting you to be doing that. I see Ms. Johnson sort of responding. I'd like her to give a response, but I guess, in a situation like that, I think staff is, flexible and responsive. And Ms. Johnson, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And as Director Guzman intimated in his comments that, yes, he can reach out directly to me and has. I would say the example that he brought forward is a little more complicated in the sense that RTD doesn't have auspices over the issue he's talking about. And so that's the whole point of the matter. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm very familiar with it. And he has had support from our staff perspective, but it's dealing with a constituent that wants something else that really involves a different municipality. So I would say when we have situations such as that, because he and I engaged and we talked about it, that those are those anomalies, and it gets back to what Director Tisdale talked about before. Of course, you can reach out to me. This is my job. I report to you all. I have day-to-day auspices over the operations of the organization. And of course, if you're getting questions relative to some aspect of our service delivery, what we're doing collectively, I am here to be supportive of that. So I just, for your edification, just wanted to qualify, that's really an outlier, which is unfortunate. But I think with Director Guzman's commitment, he's trying to go above and beyond that falls outside of the realm of RTD, because oftentimes people are confused about the specialized district that we are and what our responsibilities consist of, which is providing mass transit service to the Denver metropolitan area. So thank you for the opportunity to offer up some input there. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Catlin, if you don't mind, I see Director Williams is online, raised her hand. Were you first? Okay, Director Catlin. Okay. Director Williams.
Thank you. I'd just like us all to remember that there have been multiple times when 15 directors have received a letter from a constituent. And if we all went about trying to answer that without going through a centralized source, we would be duplicating a lot of work that we didn't need to duplicate. And so I'd really like to see a funnel neck here that allows us to input information through a process. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a good reminder. I see Mr. Kroll really quickly.
Just very quickly, in the issue in which 15 directors or 10 directors or a significant number of directors receive an email, my recommendation on that would be to ensure that the chair and the GM and CEO follow up on that, and that you leave it to the chair and the GM/CEO to follow up on it.
And keep you in it.
Yeah, and keep you apprised, of course.
Yeah. All right, Director Catlin.
Thank you. And I appreciate what Director Williams said. My practice has been, if I get an email from either a constituent or an employee, I don't respond, I forward it. But our GM CEO is uses a phrase frequently when communicating with us that I appreciate, and that's for your situational awareness. And many times when I forward something from a constituent or to the board office, it's for that reason only, just to make you aware so you're not caught off guard. And just because I forward an email does not mean I expect action. I just really want the people that can manage it to be aware that that's lying out there. So, and maybe for me, as a practice, if I do forward that, I should use that phrase. And so that you know that I don't expect anything in return, just want to make you aware.
Thank you, Director Harwick. I'm sorry? Yeah. Did something to say?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. When Mr. Kroll was speaking and he was talking about correspondence, I wanted to share oftentimes that you all may get an email that has been distributed independently to each of you, and it may be 15 times over, and it's gone to my generic email address, it's gone to the email address that's identified with my name here in this organization. So to that point, I wanted to share, it's imperative to send that to the board office quite naturally, because I've gotten it several times from you all, and I'm like, oh yes, we're on it, and then I've responded back. So I mean, sometimes there's all these outliers, but I just wanted to share that what I have seen is that people want to ensure they're getting a response, so they will just blast it. And then in these instances, it's incumbent upon us, that's why it's imperative the board office receives it. And, you know, to me as well, so you know that we're addressing the issue. So that's all I just wanted to add. So thank you for indulging me, and I'll yield the floor to Director Harwick.
Thank you.
Thank you. What I'm going to ask, I'm not sure it's possible, Jack, so I'm just going to say it. Something that would be nice, at least for me personally, would be if I'm submitting something, if I'm submitting a ticket, if it ends up being like a ticket or whatever, like there's a way for me to like log in on a back end and not necessarily see all the information, but just sort of see like a progress report. Like the other day, we'll just use Arvada again, like, okay, so it was submitted, and then I know that it's with, you know, the deputy chief is like handling it. If I haven't gotten an email, I can just go in there and see it instead of harassing the board again, just a way to sort of track these different things. And then when it's done, you know, like it's closed and I just know it's done, and maybe I'm getting an email separately, but just a way that I'm not like getting way in everybody's business, but I just have a way to sort of see the state of affairs that are affecting me and my community and my constituents.
Thank you, good. Dr. Williams, your hand is still up. Did you have more?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Dr. Sloan.
And this is just minor. Is my mic? Yes, it is on. But I never knew how to get on the old system to find out the status of a request. You know, what I would see would always say under review or something like that. There was a mysterious email portal, I think, that you could find things on, but I never knew how to do it. So I love the idea of a more open, intuitive, and obvious way to track any requests that we have. And listening to this discussion, it seems like people have different ideas about what is appropriate to take to staff. So perhaps the heading of this process should take that into consideration, because it seems to me if it's not an RTD issue, that's the answer. And it shouldn't be going further. And I appreciate the enthusiasm of directors trying to help people, but it doesn't seem to be a staff problem of this staff. It might be jurisdiction or, you know, a county, whatever, but it is not something our staff should be tasked with. And I think that could be made clear in a heading to this process. Thanks.
Dr. Guzman? No. This is a good discussion. I think it's an important discussion. As I said, we've been working on it. And what we will do is it may take a little longer to get something really nailed down, but we'll circle back, we'll take this back. A lot of it's just figuring what goes, it's hard to make solid rules that are easy to follow. And so we're working on it. Your input is welcome. Jack is a good place to take it, or me, or, and we'll try to move on. So I don't see any other people wanting to comment, so we will move on. Expectations around virtual attendance at in-person board meetings. Jack Kroll pointed out to me that our recommended action that we passed was entitled 2023 Schedule for In-Person and Remote Meetings. And for the Board of Directors, this was the recommended action for the Board of Directors to approve the 2023 schedule for in-person and virtual meetings. In adopting the schedule, the board anticipates holding all standing and ad hoc committee meetings virtually and holding monthly board meetings, special board meetings, and study sessions in person at the 1660 Blake Street offices, commencing with the March 28 board meeting unless otherwise determined by the chair in consultation with the executive committee. The in-person meetings will still have a hybrid or virtual option for public participation. I guess this is the opportunity to say, how's this working? And get your feedback. I actually think it's been working very well. Before the pandemic, we were down here, 3 nights a month at least. And, I think that people are liking the option of not being down here 3 nights a month. But I also think that coming down 1 night a month and doing it in person has been really good for collegiality, for our ability to communicate. It definitely makes a difference. So since this was a 2023 recommended action, I'm looking for feedback on what we do with 2024. And at the same time, what are our expectations? If you can be here, that you should be here unless you're out of town or sick or something. Director Whitmore.
Yeah, I just think that we have a pretty good model going. I think it worked pretty well for 2023. That being said, I do encourage board members for our in-person meetings to be here as much as possible because we need the time together before and after the meeting. But certainly I don't expect Director Williams to be here with the situation she's in, or if we're ill or we've got other issues. So that's fine. I do think that it has been maybe a bit more helpful to, trying to defer staff burnout on being here in this building for 12 or 15 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a month. Now, I'm sure that doesn't change the schedule for these two down at the end of the table, but it probably does somewhat. Or if you are here, Deborah, I would imagine you'd like to be at your desk answering our myriad of emails as opposed to, Yeah, okay, all right.
Come on, Troy.
Okay. So I like the current plan. Let's stick with it.
Great, thank you. Director Davidson.
Thank you. I also really like this. I think it's worked really well, but I have a question, I guess, with that being said, for both the board office with Mr. Kroll as well as our CEO and general manager. How's the schedule working for you for staff time?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, if I may.
Of course.
So I was chuckling because we're still here. I take the meetings here unless I'm traveling, I'm involved with something else. So for all intents and purposes, as we're preparing, it's the same. However, I will admit that when you all are in the building, quite naturally, you may want to stop by. So there is a meeting a month whereby, we don't have the opportunity to work up until 5:29 p.m. and log on. So for all intents and purposes, I would yield to board office staff because they are preparing to accommodate this meeting. And I know as it relates to our colleague in the back from RTDPD, you know, we have to have people on point and open up the building. So there are different elements, but we are a public agency and we all signed up to be in public service. So recognizing that, we have been able to shoulder this as we move full steam ahead. So with that as context, the current configuration or the model that we're utilizing works well for us. I do like the variation as it relates to having a hybrid option. We get greater participation for those that may need to juggle a multitude of different responsibilities. So that is quite helpful. And I say that because John McKay was like, oh, you should go home, because I had an event last night, I had a meeting on Monday, and I have one tomorrow night. So, but that's what I signed up for. So anyway, with that, I'll yield the floor to Mr. Kroll if he'd like to add insight from the board office.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. You know, I think I want to back up and give credit, actually. You had mentioned I raised the issue with you, but I got to give credit to Tai Shrey, who raised the issue with me to raise with you about this.
Tai Shrey.
I'm too early to really say, you know, how this whole process is working. I will say it's worked incredibly well. I don't know what it was like before. My background, as you all know, being on the Board of Regents at CU, we did all of our meetings during the day. They were 2-day-long meetings. And, you know, would it be nice? Yeah, because you asked my opinion to meet during the day. But we have a reality here, which is there's a lot of people who work on this board. And if you meet during the day, it impacts who can be on it. To echo what the GM and CEO mentioned, I signed up for this job. Whatever you all want us to do, we will execute on it. I will say the hybrid option is pretty well, if I have a sense of my staff, is pretty well appreciated by the staff.
Thank you for the comments.
Yeah. Any comment? No comment?
Oh, no further. No, thank you for, I'm in favor of it. I like it, but yeah, I just thank you for getting the staff input. Thank you.
Do you have something else, Mr. Kroll?
The only other thing that I would ask for some direction on is we'll have to bring back a recommended action. The question I would ask you all to consider, and perhaps the executive committee can solicit input from their colleagues, is in this action that we might bring forward, that we'll need to bring forward in 2024, you know, should that be set for just 2024, or should it set a longer time horizon? You know, how often do you anticipate wanting to revisit this conversation effectively?
Great. Mr. Guzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say I appreciate the format that we have, especially given certain opportunities that come up early in the year. I wasn't able to be here for several of the board meetings due to the Civic Academy with Dr. Cog, and being able to join in afterwards while the meetings were still going was really beneficial and helpful to be able to continue doing that work. I do appreciate being in person when it's possible, but I do also understand, you know, it's flu season and COVID's on the rise and all of those other wonderful things that we have to deal with. It may behoove us to keep a virtual option. And I do see people engaging that may not otherwise be able to get down here. Think about your districts and how far you travel. I'm pretty close. So, you know, when you are the school teacher or the barista working until 5 o'clock and you have to catch the lift to dash down here by 5:30 for the meeting, sometimes it is great to be able to log in virtually and still be able to participate. And I think that's just the way of the world right now and the modernization of the technology that we have. So it provides us a greater opportunity to expand it. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks. Let me ask it this way. Is there anybody opposing moving a similar policy forward for 2024 that wants to address it? Or can we stick with what we're doing in terms of the meetings that are in person and the meetings that are Zoom? Director Whitmore.
Just one thought on the 2-year idea. That might be beneficial if we could flesh that out a bit, because then that would help us to one of the other topics coming up is recruitment for future board members. So people know what the job description is. Because sometimes you're a little bit taken aback or surprised. So it might be worth, I'm not saying let's do 2 years, but I think we ought to think about it just for that very purpose.
You're talking about the membership on the committees? The
No,
chairs?
I was just, well, that could be part of it too, but having our policy set that we will continue to do this hybrid approach for 2 years as opposed to 1.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say just 2024. I mean, I think it could be 2 years. It could be, this is our policy unless we decide to revisit it.
Yeah, I think so.
That we just move this forward and stick with it. Director Tisdale?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I like the idea of having the hybrid option available. However, I do like the in-person meetings. And we did agree, and this was based upon advice that we had received from our staff, that the board meetings, the full board meetings, study sessions, and so forth would be held in person, but that the committee meetings would be held strictly remotely. I would like us to revisit that. I would like us to view the possibility of having the committee meetings in person. I do believe that all of the meetings should include a hybrid option for directors who have circumstances that arise that preclude their in-person attendance, but they can participate. We've had many directors at many times calling in from all parts of the country and from hospital beds and otherwise to participate in these meetings, and that's wonderful to make that available to them. But I would like for the able-bodied who can, for the committee meetings to be here in person. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, that's a big change. So that would take some further conversation. Any other conversation on that, Director Bouquet?
I'm against that. I just wanted to point that out. I feel like it's sufficient, just respectively, again, as a full-time employee. I am against that. I think one meeting in person a month is appropriate, and I think it's a great way to, connect with one another, but that's my personal opinion. I think it's the personal opinion, again, for plenty of folks who, this is a $12,000 stipend. I wish I could do full-time with being an RTE board member, but I just don't get paid enough. I do want to go back to Director Whitmore's point. I honestly think the model that we have laid out, I think it's more than appropriate to stick with that model unless said otherwise, because again, I considered it when I was running back in 2020 of what the meeting schedule was. And again, going to recruiting new board members, that balance, and understanding, hey, is this a time commitment I could even do? Because if these were meetings that were happening in the middle of the day, I would not have ran for this position. So I think that keeping with the schedule, unless said otherwise, going beyond the 2024 model, I think is more than appropriate, but that's where I lean. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Dr. Davidson and Director Broom in just a second, but I was seeing some general head nodding for keeping the system that we have. And then I tend to agree, we don't need to revisit this every year. How are we with some head nods on just moving this forward as our general policy? And if we decide to revisit it, we can bring that forward. Vince has his thumb up. Okay. I'm not closing off the conversation. Director Davidson.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I want to acknowledge Director Tisdale, the preference on it. But I do want to point out, one of the questions that's been on my mind is just, the nature of virtual meetings. And I think when we all move forward in the pandemic, the collective we everywhere, we didn't know what we were up against and what to expect. And one of the questions on my mind is how efficient would we all be virtually? And I do think that generally speaking, our committee meetings are efficient. They go well. And it offers us an opportunity to have the different medium and has the advantages that Director Bouquet brought up. And I think increasingly we can expect this model that new directors and new folks coming in will expect this. Speaking in my private sector life, the two boards in my private sector life that I currently work with now, some are in person and some are virtual. And there are some things that are done more effectively in person. some things that are done equally well across both. I think we're going to see more of this, not less. I think the point is well taken from Director Tisdale. I just wanted to note that I think we've still remained efficient, and that, in my mind, that allows us to take advantage of the pros that Director Bouquet pointed out without any cons on those committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Broom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The other thing that I wanted to remember to bring up was that I thought it was a better idea to have the officers also have a 2-year cycle as opposed to just 1 year, because by the time they get acclimated, particularly the chair, you know, their time is up. And plus the fact that you've got a voice and a face that you associate with an organization that way. Otherwise, it's just constant change going on over time. And that would help fix this problem about the committee makeup. I think making sure that you get the people 2 years on like the finance committee or whatever, as opposed to, you know, reshuffling the deck every year.
Great. I think that I would like to put that under our last bullet point here, which is to ask for people to briefly suggest topics for future board review. I think that's a bigger discussion than we can have still tonight, but I think it's a discussion that's worth having. So thanks. I'm putting that in that corner right now. Director Guzman.
Just really quickly about the in-person versus hybrid meetings, there may be reasons that we do need to strive to have in-person meetings. One of those being performance committee. We've already established that, and that is not a meeting that would be appropriate to have on a hybrid situation for security reasons, but also because it's a human interaction and a human review, and that demands a different type of respect and function within this body for our GM CEO. And so it is that one is not up for debate, right? And I do believe that there will be times when we as a body need to make that determination. The chairs are imbued with that responsibility, and maybe there will come an opportunity to be able to make that decision differently in the future. But I think for all intents and purposes, none of us would want to be in a room where somebody might get exposed to COVID, right? Like that's been a long-term thing. And so offering those options when we can, but also being realistic and flexible when we need to be, and demanding of ourselves to say we need to show up. We need to show up as humans for another human in this role is really important. So I see value in both of them, but I do think that this model works for now, and we can adjust as necessary when we go forward.
Thank you. And the recommended action we passed says unless otherwise determined by the chair in consultation with the executive committee. And I think that's important to keep. The performance committee meeting that he's referring to, once again, November 13th at 5:30 p.m. We want everybody here that night unless you have COVID or another very valid excuse. And I also wanted to say that if you're not coming to an in-person meeting, I think most people do this, but please let Jack or me know in advance so we know what to expect. I want to move on pretty quickly from this, but go ahead.
I just wanted to give Director Guzman a here on that for sure. And yeah, you mentioned what I was going to mention, that we have that in the committees and a good opportunity for committee members to say this will be more efficient in person, or committee chairs rather. Thank you.
And one other item I have on here that is just a reminder in that regard, which is we have said we're not going to have December meetings or August meetings with exceptions. Again, we're going to be flexible, but at least one of those this year is going to be a performance committee meeting, so we can wrap that up. And so there will be, at least that meeting in December. And that's all we need on that topic. One other quick topic I mentioned to some of you, but thinking through the fact that we have 3 board members, sadly, that are term limited, Director Tisdale, Director Williams, and Director Broom. We don't know whether others who aren't term limited might decide not to run again, but focusing on those, the discussion is back up as it comes up every fairly often in the legislature and in the area about do we change the board? And, my reaction to that is keep us in the conversation if you're talking about changing the board. And, let's see where we are. What's the problem we're trying to solve? But really, it's not necessarily something we can control. We can, give our input, but we can't necessarily control. So my view of that is, with these 3 districts that we know, I think let's set a plan, and a lot of this is up to you, the directors, but I think the board office is game to help us, and I'm game to help. I think the executive committee and others, let's come up with a plan for having someone, whether it's you or someone else from the board, going out to whoever, the chamber, the economic development committee, the local environmental groups or the state environmental groups, whoever, and starting to say, help us recruit. We would appreciate you helping look for these things. And we can talk about some of the areas that would be helpful, public finance experience, audit experience, people who ride the system, various areas like that. But I think we don't know if the legislature or anyone else will make a change, but I think we can make sure that we are moving forward in a constructive way to replace very talented board members with hopefully nearly as talented a board member. How's that? So, and we can get a plan where we just follow up with them. They may not be inspired. The chamber may say, oh yeah, we'd love to do it, but then put it on the back burner, but maybe they get a call from somebody else to remind them. So I don't even know if we need feedback on that tonight. I would like feedback on it generally. So that could come again to Jack or to me or to, others on the executive committee. See if we move that forward. Other specific policies, thank you, Director Broom, for the one you raised. I would mention that the expense policy, thank you to the board office for the good work on that. It is coming forward as a discussion item, and that's something that we've also been working on, is to bring big changes, and many of our changes forward to the board as discussion items before they come as recommended actions. And I think everybody has been liking that. So are there other specific policies anybody would want to suggest now? This is an open-ended question that, there certainly are other ones that you can bring to us in the near future, but that's a final question, a final finale. Well, we'll see if you have other matters, but anything else?
We got enough.
Got enough? All right. Any other matters for this board? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All right, we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks. Got a little later than I wanted.
Doug still can get to bed on the right time schedule.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it'd be interesting to sit in on some of the meetings of the Broncos.
Make our meetings that last until midnight seem pretty easy, wouldn't it?
I would think so. What a mess.
Yeah, writing that ship is.